People will do anything, no matter how absurd, to avoid facing their own soul. Carl Jung. You finally woke up. You saw through the illusions, the rat race, the lies society sold you, the false self you wore like a mask. You reached that moment of clarity we call a spiritual awakening. And then, everything collapsed. What happened to your drive? Your ambition? The goals that once lit you on fire now seem pointless. You're not lazy. You're not broken. You're just standing at the edge of the void, and Carl Jung knew it well. You see, Jung taught that the ego, the I you once identified with, is only the tip of the iceberg. When that ego starts to crack, the unconscious floods in. You begin to see your shadow, the parts of you you've denied. And when that happens, your old motivations die. Why? Because they were rooted in who you thought you were, not who you really are. This phase is called the night sea journey, a descent into yourself. It's terrifying. It's empty. But it's necessary. You feel like you've lost motivation. But what you've really lost is false fuel, ego desires, societal approval, external rewards. Now is the time to go deeper. Now is the time to ask. What truly matters to me? What is worthy of my life energy? What is mine to do in this world? Because motivation after awakening isn't fire, it's stillness that moves. It's not hype. It's truth. Carl Jung once said, the privilege of a lifetime is to become who you truly are. So if you feel empty, good. That emptiness is sacred. Don't rush to fill it. Let it teach you. Because on the other side of this dark night is your true life. Not a life inherited. Not a life imposed. But a life chosen, with awareness, courage, and soul. After a spiritual awakening, many people expect to feel permanently elevated, energized, and inspired, but instead, they are often met with a heavy sense of emptiness. This experience can feel deeply unsettling, even frightening, especially when it contradicts the expectations that awakening would bring eternal peace or a sense of higher purpose. But this emptiness is not a mistake. It's not a sign that you've gone backwards. In fact, it's a natural and even essential part of the transformation process. The moment you awaken spiritually, the identity you once held begins to dissolve. The goals, attachments, and ambitions you used to chase start to lose their appeal. The structures that gave you a sense of meaning, success, validation, material achievement, even spiritual practices pursued with egoic motives, may suddenly feel hollow. The person you once were no longer makes sense to you, and yet the person you are becoming hasn't fully taken shape. You are in between lives, so to speak. This is the liminal space that Carl Jung often described, the place between death and rebirth. And in that space, emptiness is not just common. It is unavoidable. This emptiness is what happens when the ego's engine stops running. The drive to prove something, to win approval, to dominate, to achieve in order to feel enough, all of that begins to fall away. It's not that you don't care anymore, it's that the things you used to care about no longer resonate with your deeper self. The ego thrives on stimulation, comparison, progress, and external rewards. When those motivations fade, the psyche initially feels lost, as if it's drifting in a sea of nothingness. And that is exactly where growth begins. Jung referred to this place as the descent into the unconscious, a necessary journey into the inner world where real transformation can take root. The emptiness is not a lack, but a clearing. It is the stripping away of illusions, masks, and compulsions. It feels like death because, in a sense, it is the death of who you thought you were. Many people panic in this stage and try to recreate their old self, grasping for familiar goals or distractions to avoid the discomfort of the void. But this resistance only prolongs the process. The emptiness must be faced. It must be sat with. Only by moving through it can you begin to encounter the authentic self that lies underneath the conditioned personality. What feels like a loss of motivation is actually the psyche's way of saying, stop. Listen. There is something more important trying to emerge. The emptiness is not a void to be filled, it is a silence to be honored. In that silence, your true values, desires, and path begin to reveal themselves. But they do not arrive with fireworks. They arrive quietly, like whispers from the soul. To reach that depth, you must first be willing to sit in the stillness where the ego used to roar. This is the terrain of true awakening, not constant bliss, but profound realignment. And it begins with the courage to feel completely empty. When the ego collapses after a spiritual awakening, it often feels like everything you knew about yourself is unraveling. The identity you built over a lifetime, your roles, beliefs, preferences, achievements, and even your sense of worth, suddenly begins to feel fragile, artificial, and disconnected. What once defined you starts to disintegrate, not because you've failed, but because something deeper is demanding to be seen. This collapse is not a breakdown in the traditional sense, it's the cracking of the surface self, making way for the unconscious to rise. And what comes forward first is often what Carl Jung called the shadow. The shadow is made up of everything we've suppressed, denied, or rejected in ourselves. These are the thoughts we're ashamed of, the emotions we've repressed, the impulses we deemed unacceptable, and the traits we projected onto others. For years, the ego kept the shadow hidden behind a wall of self-image, morality, and social conditioning. But once the ego loses its grip, often triggered by a spiritual awakening, those defenses weaken. The shadow begins to rise, not as punishment, but as truth. It is the part of you that was always there, waiting to be acknowledged and integrated. This emergence can be terrifying. Many people imagine spiritual awakening as a blissful, euphoric process. But in reality, it's often a confrontation with the rawest parts of your humanity. You might experience sudden anger, grief, jealousy, resentment, or fear that you can't explain. You might be haunted by memories you thought you'd buried. You might begin to see aspects of yourself in others that once repelled you. This is the shadow asserting itself, pulling you into the deeper waters of your psyche. And while it's uncomfortable, it's also necessary. Jung believed that no genuine transformation is possible without the integration of the shadow. Ignoring it only leads to projection and self-deception. The collapse of the ego doesn't mean the self disappears, it means it's being restructured. The ego was the mask. The shadow is the hidden content. When they meet, what emerges is not chaos, but potential. This inner encounter gives you access to a fuller version of who you are, one that is not limited to light or darkness, good or bad, but wholeness. By allowing the shadow to rise, you become more honest, more grounded, and more human. You start to see the complexity of your own nature and, in turn, develop more compassion for others. This is where real motivation begins to take root, not in the pursuit of perfection, but in the acceptance of your totality. As the ego collapses and the shadow rises, you are being invited into a more authentic existence. It is not easy, and it is not always beautiful on the surface. But it is real. And that reality, once embraced, gives birth to a new kind of inner strength, the kind that doesn't rely on image or approval, but on the quiet power of self-knowledge. When a spiritual awakening occurs, it often feels like a fire has swept through your inner world, leaving behind the ashes of who you thought you were. One of the most jarring effects of this experience is the sudden disappearance of motivation. The goals that once energized you, the achievements you tirelessly pursued, and the ambitions that structured your entire sense of purpose suddenly seem meaningless. This loss can feel confusing, even depressing. But it's not a sign that something has gone wrong, it's a sign that something false is falling away. The truth is, much of the motivation people live by before awakening is not rooted in authenticity. It's rooted in fear, ego, programming, and survival. Most of us are raised in environments that teach us what to value based on external validation. From a young age, we're conditioned to believe that success, approval, status, appearance, and control are the markers of a meaningful life. We develop dreams that aren't really ours. Ambitions shaped by parental expectations, cultural norms, or societal ideals. We chase promotions, perfect relationships, money, or recognition not because they truly satisfy us, but because they temporarily quiet the inner voice that whispers, "You're not enough." This is the ego's game. It fuels motivation not with truth, but with scarcity. The drive isn't love, it's fear of failure, rejection, insignificance. When awakening begins, these motivations start to crumble because the false self they were built around begins to dissolve. You no longer believe you need to become someone else to be whole. You no longer believe that happiness lies out there. And as that realization settles in, the entire motivational structure that kept you moving before, often fueled by anxiety, competition, comparison, or wounded pride, no longer makes sense. You're not broken. You're just waking up from a dream. This death of old motivations is painful because it creates a vacuum. You may not yet know what your new motivations are, but you can feel that the old ones are dead. It's a disorienting space, one that many try to escape by returning to their previous life goals, forcing themselves to feel ambition again, or numbing the void with distractions. But this stage isn't meant to be skipped. It's a sacred pause, an invitation to examine what truly matters. When you let the old motivations die without reviving them out of fear, something deeper begins to stir. A quieter, subtler impulse begins to emerge, not to impress, prove, or achieve, but to express, to serve, to align. This kind of motivation doesn't rush. It doesn't seek applause. It grows from within, from a place of self-knowledge and soul. But to reach that place, the false must die first. And that death is not the end of your drive, it's the beginning of your real one. The one that doesn't chase illusions, but honors truth. The night sea journey is an ancient mythological motif and a deeply symbolic term used by Carl Jung to describe a critical phase in personal transformation. It refers to the dark, inward journey that often follows a spiritual awakening, when a person is stripped of old identities, beliefs, and motivations. During this phase, nothing seems clear. The light that once guided you, your goals, passions, sense of purpose, disappears, and you're left drifting in a sea of uncertainty. This journey is not one of outward adventure but an internal descent into the depths of your psyche, where the conscious mind must confront the unconscious and all that has been hidden or ignored. This passage is often triggered by a collapse of a worldview, a relationship, a job, or the ego itself. Life may suddenly lose its former meaning. The things you used to love doing no longer bring joy. You may feel emotionally numb, creatively blocked, or spiritually disoriented. These experiences are not signs of failure or regression. They are signs that you've entered the night sea. In mythology, heroes like Odysseus and Jonah found themselves swallowed by the sea or a great beast, taken far from familiar shores, left to wrestle with death, fear, and transformation. In Jungian psychology, this represents the period when the old self must symbolically die to allow the new self to be born. But this death is not quick or clean. It involves facing your shadow, everything within you that you've denied, repressed, or avoided. It involves grieving the loss of your former identity, the person you thought you were. It may involve intense loneliness, because those around you may not understand what you're going through. The world keeps moving, expecting you to show up as you always have, while internally you are dissolving. This is what makes the night sea journey so painful. It is invisible to others, but it consumes you from within. What's crucial to understand is that this darkness is not pointless. In fact, it is rich with meaning. The night sea journey is not about losing yourself, but about uncovering what was hidden beneath the surface all along. It is about surrender, letting go of control, of knowing, of the constant need to do, and instead learning how to be with yourself in your rawest, most honest state. In this state, the unconscious begins to speak. Dreams become vivid, symbols emerge, emotions deepen. You are being asked to feel what you've avoided, to listen to what you've silenced, and to remember who you were before the world told you who to be. Jung emphasized that the night sea journey is a rite of passage. Without it, true individuation, the process of becoming your authentic self, cannot occur. It is the crucible in which the false burns away, leaving only what is real. Though it is often filled with fear, confusion, and loss, it is also the birthplace of profound clarity and power. The darkness is not there to destroy you, it is there to reveal you. After a spiritual awakening, external sources of motivation lose their grip. The applause, the status, the social rewards that once felt vital now feel strangely hollow. The need to be better than others, to accumulate wealth or validation, to conform to someone else's vision of success starts to evaporate. This isn't laziness. It's not indifference. It's a deep shift in where your energy comes from. You begin to see that motivation driven by fear, competition, guilt, or the desire to impress is unsustainable. These were borrowed flames, sparks lit by culture, family, or ego. And once the illusion fades, there's only one place left to look for true motivation, within. This is one of the most confronting parts of post-awakening life. You are no longer fueled by the same forces that used to push you forward. You can't rely on shame or ambition to move you, because your soul has outgrown them. The ego used to scream, "Go faster. Do more. Be better." But that voice is quieter now, and in its absence, you are left in a kind of silence. At first, it may feel like emptiness. But in that stillness lies the seed of something far more powerful, self-aligned intention. When motivation comes from within, it is not frantic or compulsive. It doesn't need applause. It isn't afraid of failure. It rises from clarity, from connection to something deeper than ego, your essence, your values, your truth. You no longer move just to survive or to win. You move because something inside you wants to express itself. You create because it's meaningful. You act because it feels right, not because someone told you it's what you should do. This inner-directed motivation is quieter, but it's also more enduring. It may not deliver instant rewards, but it builds a life of substance. To access this inner source, you must first strip away the noise. That means stepping back from comparison, from performative success, from the pressure to chase what doesn't resonate. It means getting honest about what lights you up when no one is watching. It requires deep listening, to your body, your emotions, your intuition. The answers won't always come fast. They often arrive slowly, in fragments, in whispers. But they are yours. They are not programmed into you by a system. They are born from your soul's dialogue with the world. This shift isn't always convenient. It may require you to say no to things that once impressed others. It may mean following a path that doesn't make sense to anyone else. But this is the price of authenticity. When you let your inner world lead, you stop living a borrowed life. You stop outsourcing your drive to people or systems that don't know who you really are. True motivation is not about being pushed from behind. It's about being pulled forward by something alive inside you. That pull is subtle but steady. And once you find it, you realize, you never needed anything outside of you to begin with. The emptiness that follows a spiritual awakening is often misunderstood. It feels like a void, a loss of direction, a numbness where once there was drive, emotion, and clarity. The things that used to bring joy no longer spark the same excitement. Old goals lose their flavor. The routines that once gave structure now feel lifeless. Many people assume something has gone wrong, that they're broken or have fallen into depression. But this emptiness isn't a problem to fix, it's a sacred space. It is not a sign of failure. It is an invitation. Something old has died, and the new has not yet arrived. You are standing at the threshold between who you were and who you are becoming. This sacred emptiness is the soul's breathing room. It is the space where the noise of ego dissolves, and the deeper voice of truth begins to emerge. But that voice does not shout. It whispers. It waits for silence. And that silence only comes when everything that once distracted you is cleared away. This is why the emptiness feels so unsettling. It removes all the crutches you leaned on. It exposes your raw, unfiltered being. No roles to play. No masks to wear. Just you, sitting with yourself. And in that stillness, you begin to sense the deeper layers of who you are. Sacred emptiness is not passive. It's not about doing nothing or being apathetic. It's a fertile ground, a womb of the soul, where new insights are conceived and authentic desires begin to stir. But like any womb, it's dark and unknown. You can't rush this space. You can't force clarity to come. You can only be with it, patiently, attentively, gently. It demands surrender, the willingness to stop trying to control, to let go of what no longer serves, even if it once defined your life. In this space, grief often surfaces. Not just for what was lost, but for all the years spent chasing things that were never real. There's a mourning for old identities, old illusions, old versions of yourself that were built to survive, but not to thrive. And in that mourning, something begins to shift. You realize that emptiness is not lack, it is potential. It is the clearing before the new foundation is laid. It is the silence before the music begins. Sacred emptiness holds you in a place beyond doing, achieving, or fixing. It calls you back to being. To presence. To noticing what arises without judgment. To learning how to live from your center instead of your surface. It teaches you to stop reaching and start receiving. It's a passage, not a prison. And when you honor it, when you stop resisting it, it slowly begins to reveal its gifts. Insights emerge. Purpose begins to take root, not the kind you inherited from the world, but the kind that is uniquely yours. The emptiness, once feared, becomes a sanctuary. Not the end of something, but the sacred beginning of everything real. So if you find yourself in that still, strange place after awakening, where the fire seems gone, the goals feel empty, and you question everything, know this, you are not lost. You are not broken. You are simply being stripped of illusions. The false motivations that once pushed you are falling away, and in their place, something more honest is beginning to form. Carl Jung called this descent into darkness a necessary step toward individuation, the birth of your true self. What feels like emptiness is sacred space. What feels like confusion is fertile ground. And what feels like the death of motivation is the quiet preparation for a life led not by ego, but by soul. Don't rush to fill the void. Don't try to revive what's already dead. Sit in the stillness. Listen to the silence. Because in that silence, a new kind of fire begins to glow, not one that burns for approval or achievement, but one that radiates from within. A fire that belongs to you. And when it rises, it won't feel like force. It will feel like alignment. Like coming home. And then, you'll understand, you never lost your motivation. You just outgrew the version of yourself that needed the wrong kind.